Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this early afternoon panel on the Western Balkans. There will be a slight deviation from the printed program, as you will see in a second. But we do have two ministers from the Western Balkans with us, and of course, Christian Danielsen from the EU Commission. This panel is called the Western Balkans Chessboard, and I am to introduce myself shortly. I'm a journalist with German's Newsweekly Die Zeit from Hamburg, and as we Germans like order, I would briefly try to bring some order into the chessboard or the Western Balkans for beginners and for insiders. There are 5 categories of Western Balkan states, if I'm not wrong, and there are at least 3 external players on the chessboard. What are the 5 categories? Croatia, as you all know, is already an EU member state. It joined the EU in 2013. Montenegro and Serbia are having access negotiations at the moment. They are the front runners of EU accession. And they might, in a best case scenario, be ready for EU membership by 2025. Third category of Western Balkan states are those for which negotiations might be prepared. And these are Albania and Macedonia. And the fourth category, and we have a minister from this country here this afternoon, is Bosnia and Herzegovina, which could become a candidate for accession. And the fifth category is Kosovo, which is not even in shape yet to become a candidate. In other words, if there is a chessboard, it is a very, very uneven, rough playing field. And as I promised you, there are 3 players from the outside, which of course are the EU, China, Russia, and Turkey. I'd like to start off with introducing you to the Slido system, which I guess you already know. If you go to the Slido page and you enter the hashtag for this session, you will be able to give a vote on a question which I would like to pose to you at the beginning. And this question will be if you believe that the perspective for some of the Western Balkan states to join the EU by 2025 is actually realistic. So do you believe that we will see some of the Western Balkan states become members of the EU by 2025? We will get the results in a few minutes. But now let us introduce the panel. If I may ask the panel on stage, please. My pleasure to introduce you. Right next to me is Josef Prikic. He is the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The gentleman in the middle is Predrag Bošković, Minister of Defense of Montenegro. And to the far left, from my view, is Christian Danielsen, Director General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations, European Commission, Brussels. Gentlemen, welcome to this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christian Danielsen, would you agree with what I just lined out, that the Western Balkans, if they are a chessboard, they are a very uneven and rough chessboard?
Not completely. Or I would rather say that I see it from another angle. I see it more that Western Balkan, the 6 countries that is encompassing the Western Balkan in our terminology, which are those who are aspiring to become members of the EU, they are all very determined in moving in that direction. And what I think is the essential issue right now is that issue, the issue of them moving in the direction of Europe, the European perspective, that one has come up as a major political priority within the EU. And that was what was the object of the Sofia summit yesterday. And that is what is very much on the agenda in the EU more generally. And I think that is how I would look on it. And then it's true what you said, that the six are all looked upon individually. And some of them are front runners today. Others are further back in the process. But they're all following the same process. And I think what is also essential here today compared to what was perhaps the case for a couple of years ago is that the European perspective has become clearer. But also I think there is more clarity on what needs to be done by the six countries. And that is what you find in the Commission strategy, and that's what you can find also in the declaration out of Sofia yesterday, which is a very, very important part of work to carry out, everything from governance, rule of law, to issues relating to reforming the economy, to issues relating to the reconciliation. And the third element I think is essential is that it's also clear that from the EU's part, it was also from the member states, there is a strong willingness to support. And I think that came out also very clearly from yesterday's in the Sofia agenda. And it's also very clear from what we have set out in the strategy from the Commission with the six flagship initiatives in the area of rule of law, in the area of security migration, in the area of socio-economic development, in the area of connectivity or transport and all that comes with it, in the area of digitalization, and not least in the area of reconciliation. So I would see it like that rather than trying to put them into a chessboard in the way you did.
Thanks very much. Yeah, you mentioned the EU strategy to the Western Balkan enlargement, which contains some very clear language, and I'd like to quote from this a bit later on. But I'd like to ask the ministers from the Balkans about a broader picture, actually. The EU has just experienced what one could call a clash of worldviews, anyway, between East and West. Roughly speaking, a cosmopolitan approach in the West, and a rather nationalistic approach in the East. And one might even say that the EU is not so much a union of shared values any longer. And now I was wondering where you would position the Balkan states in this divide, on which camp? Or to put it a bit more provocantly, why should we enlarge this problem, this divide of Europe, by enlarging the EU even further?
Why? Because I think that you should stick with your words and the promises that were given for all of the countries of the Western Balkans in 2003. And imperfect as it is, European Union today, my deep belief, is a still better place to live for all of the countries and the peoples in the Western Balkans. I think that what the Commission did with the strategy and what the member states showed yesterday in Sofia is clearly underlining once again that the European Union is not formalized without the Western Balkan countries. And I believe that this should be done, if I may touch upon the time, what you have said, 2025, roughly around those dates, that the entire region can become the EU member countries. Because I deeply believe that this is by far cheaper and smarter investment of the European Union to have stable, secure, and economically prosperous kitchen garden of Europe. Don't forget, we are just 250 kilometers away from the place where we sit. So this region is not artificially too far away. Basically, it is geographically the part of Europe, culturally the part of Europe, and it should only be the part of the European institutions. Underlining once again, imperfect as it is, for us, this is still shiny candy that will make our societies better by reforming us on our path to the EU.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Bošković, do you agree? Who has to reform whom?
Of course, we don't have a problem when we go out to agree each other, but as Minister of Defense, I'm not. Maybe I will not be so much diplomatic today, telling you about the things about Western Balkan and EU. But when it comes to the chess game, what you had at the previous topic for this panel, I really think that this chess game is more complex right now in European Union than on Western Balkan. Even the challenges in front of the countries on Western Balkans are even much more demanding, let's say, and the problems are existing there are still very significant. But what we are seeing right now from Western Balkan countries is not European Union united like what was, let's say, 10 years ago or something like that. And but still, the idealization of European Union from the people on Western Balkans is even higher than, let's say, 10 years ago, because still we do see European Union as a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that opinion about European Union is significantly better and higher among the population on Western Balkans than its own member states of European Union. The problems what European Union facing right now are the problems that occur because European Union was not enough, didn't have enough courage to make some decisions much earlier than during those events happens, like immigration crisis, like Brexit, like some other potential threats for the stability and security of European Union. But nevertheless, Western Balkan doesn't have an alternative. And it's not just European Union, it's also NATO as a security organization. And I'm pretty sure that Western Balkan will be unstable until the very last moment of entrance of the last country of Western Balkan into European Union.
Thank you very much, sir. I'd like to jump in with the results of your vote. I have it here on the screen. I don't know if we can put it to the big screen, if that's possible. Ah, there we are. Early days, I'm getting in the earpiece, but there is a clear tendency here, the majority of you believe, 58%, that yes, it is a realistic scenario that by 2025 we will be 29 members in the European Union with some new additional members, if the Brits have left by then. Well, I promised you to quote from the very outspoken report of the European Commission on the Western Balkan states, and let me confront you with one of the findings of the European Commission, which reads that organized crime's foothold on the Western Balkans remains strong in terms of human trafficking, drugs, and weapons, or risk of criminal infiltration of the political system. Are your governments infiltrated by criminals? Is the Commission right?
No. I mean, in this respect, the Western Balkans is no difference than the other countries, or I would say the countries, member states of the European Union. I wouldn't say that there is so much of a difference of the region from certain parts, at least certain parts of the European Union.
I mean, they are also infiltrated.
I want to say that this is not specific for my region. This is shown as, I would say, disease throughout the region, and it was recognized as a strategy for all of the countries. What helps is building democracy, stabilizing democracy, building rule of law, and the implementation of the court's decisions. And then, of course, which is the prerequisite political will to foster all of the reforms that needs to be done. Once again, the path which assumes all of this towards the EU membership is the path to democratize our societies. And a small I would say, a notion on the question. This is, if it is a small a signal of how the citizens of the EU or those who can tap see the future of the Western Balkans. Public opinion is very much important for the decision makers within the EU member state countries and EU institutions. Let's not forget the opening statement of the President Juncker speech speaking about the enlargement just a couple of years ago and the point in which we are right now.
Mr. Bošković?
Of course, organized crimes is present in every country of Western Balkan, and we are fighting that on a daily basis. I can even agree that it's even more present than most of EU countries. But there is no difference when it comes, is it infiltrated among the politicians, governments, or organizations. I strongly believe that it's not a tag that can you just put on Montenegro or something like that, because I know very well how hard we are fighting against the organized crime and corruption, and how much efforts we are putting to clear the name of my country and to try to fulfill all the preconditions to be part of European Union. And we know that in negotiations, since we really do have a long-lasting negotiation with EU, that it's one of the preconditions. That's why we opened chapter 24 and 25 as the first chapters for negotiations. And I'm pretty sure that we are doing well. Of course, there is incidents, events that making our efforts and jobs very difficult, but for sure we are doing our best. Maybe somebody could do it better, but I really would like to say here that we are doing our best.
Mr. Danielson, don't we know from experience by now that fighting corruption, making countries fit for the rule of law, property rights, trust in institution is rather a generational challenge than one that could be solved within 5 or 7 years' time?
No, I think you're right that this is a real challenge. I would broaden it. I think the European choice for the countries in the region is a generational choice, and it's a choice that needs to be shared by the leaders, by the political forces, and by the public opinion at large. And that is because the challenges that are out there, and you mentioned one, which is clear. We are also mentioning, I think, signs of state capture in the report, which is also true. These are challenges which are substantial. Now, that being said, I think we need to recognize what has happened in the region over the last, I would say, 10 years. There are substantive steps that have been taken by all the countries in addressing these issues. And we could go through each of them if you wish, but that is the reality. But in order for the countries to be up to the standards that are called for to join the European Union, there is quite a lot of that remains to be done. The speed of doing that is very much in the hands of in this case, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, and all the rest of them. We are there in order to help and support. I think one thing, other additional aspects on this which is coming in and is a force for change is the economy. Because it's so clear that issues relating to organized crime, rule of law, functioning judiciary, has a direct link to the attractiveness for direct investments, or for that sake, for growth to take off. And I think that is something which is broadly recognized in the countries, and you can see that that is also driving part of this change that is underway.
Mr. Vrikic, you said that your region doesn't have an alternative to Europe. Is that entirely true? I mean, we do see interested investors from China, from Russia, from Turkey even, trying to get a foothold in your region, who might not be so strict on issues like compliance or the rule of law?
In the terms of the integration, there is no alternative. in the terms of influence, political one, or the value one, there is a competition going on. That's why I think that the EU, as the flag carrier of the values of freedom, democracy, rule of law, should step in even deeper and put the money where the mouth are, as our transatlantic friends are saying that this vision and the strategy of for the enlargement of the European Union is shown in more deeds than we have right now. And we have a really decent level of the engagement. But it doesn't mean that third countries, other regions, or some ideologies are not active in the region as well.
Mr. Bošković, how can we imagine these activities in the region? There was an attempted coup in Montenegro in 2016 when allegedly a gang which was financed and directed from Russian intelligence tried to topple the government. What has come out of this? What do you know about the backgrounds by now? And is this an indicator to the attempts of further Russian influence in your country?
First of all, I would like to also say something about influence of other countries, not European Union, in the region. I can say that you are not right when you are telling that there is a strong interference of some other interest in the Balkan region aside of EU. And you mentioned China, you mentioned Russia, you mentioned Turkey as well, but that's completely normal. If EU doesn't putting too much interest on the Balkan region, somebody else will fulfill the gap. Because as here you have politicians in Western Balkan, when they win the election, they promise something. If they promise something, they need to fulfill it to win elections again in 4 years. So they need to bring some additional value for those 4 years to the population. If EU is not capable to do that, somebody else will do it. And I fully agree with the rest part of your statement that doesn't have so much compliance with the law, etc., etc. So it's an edge that you need to take care about, not jeopardizing, let's say, the reform process on your way to European Union, but from another side, you need the foreign investors to develop your country and to have economical growth, because that region is significantly poorer than EU. And also after the old, what's happened during the 90s, then it's necessity for even stronger economical growth and economical development. So I don't think it's something that it's not normal when it comes to the region. On your second question about Russian influence, I think that Montenegro was after, of course, Ukraine, which was completely visible, and something that was the second and actually the first example of a completely new strategy and hybrid war and everything what's happened in 2016. But fortunately, we had institutions that could fought against it and even fighting today on the court case. But what it is situation right now, that situation in Montenegro is, from my perspective, is much more easier. Even we had the presidential elections a month ago, and the political campaign was very smooth, without any tensions, with very mild rhetoric, etc. Completely different what was in 2016 when we had these parliamentarian elections. So at least our accession to NATO had this great benefit for us to let's say, have much calmer atmosphere on a domestic political scene. But I guarantee we need to work hardly together on the region to keep open door policy when it comes to NATO, and also to speed up accession process when it comes to EU integration.
I'd like to give you a number illustrating the gap wealth between the EU and parts of the Balkans. I looked it up. The GDP per capita for Bosnia and Herzegovina is around $4,700. That is about half as big as the GDP per capita of Botswana. So, and I have a very good question from the audience concerning the rush, if you like, of investors to your region. And the question is from Pascal Ayman. He asks, to what extent, and I'd like to put this question to you, Mr. Danielson, to what extent is influence from external actors like Russia or even extreme Islam, he asks, a driver for a speedy EU accession of the Balkan countries? So does the EU have to rush a bit here in order to prevent other competitors from stepping in?
I think this is one important element, in fact, why the issue of Western Balkan has come up on the European agenda to the extent it has. I think there are a couple of elements here. One is the policy challenges that we have been standing in front of, migration, security, fighting terrorism. You mentioned international organized crime. So that's one element. I think another element is the economy, and we should not underestimate there's a huge potential in the Western Balkan. They have a steady growth at around 4.5% right now. I give you the figure. It's 33% in average of the EU. It's not that bad. And there is a potential of having growth rates in these countries that could be double-digit if they address issues relating to budget, to business climate, to regulatory burden, to the whole issue of judiciary, to fighting corruption, to the informal economy, and so on and so forth. So I think that has played a role where I saw this morning on the German morning show, there was the economy minister pointing to the fact that here is an area, and he mentioned Kosovo, in fact, where there is a real potential for growth that needs to take place because it's in our interest. We want to export stability and not import instability. Now, to your question, the final one. It's clear that if Europe would not have been active in the Western Balkans, somebody else would have been much more active. But what reassures me is firstly that it is political priority. Secondly, if you look on figures, trade, 72% is with the EU, Russia, 5%, China, 5%. If you look on foreign direct investments, 74% with the EU, Russia, 2%, I think it is. US at this bit the same level. So you have that one underway. What now is the important, I think, challenge is to see to that through the reforms, getting the economy moving forward and thereby also moving forward in this whole path towards with the European perspective.
I have another very good question from the audience on exactly this topic. And John, he identifies himself as John solely, asks, can the EU and Russia cooperate in the Western Balkans? May I put this question to you? I mean, you could also frame it as the question, could the EU avoid the mistake that it has allegedly committed in the Ukraine by, from Russia's point of view, not engaging Russia properly?
I'll give you my country national position, for example. We are the country of the Western Balkans that didn't align with the EU sanctions to Russia. The sheer fact benefited our economy and our trade because we can export to the great Russian market. At the same time, and it is understood by the EU institutions that the specific position of the Bosnia and Herzegovina in this regard, we still stick with the A1 foreign policy goal, which is the EU member state. So it can be combined one with another when it comes from our point of view. So, but we don't have slightest reserve. Will Bosnia and Herzegovina go direction of Russia in terms of political, military, or whatever? Bigger connections, more than normal diplomatic relations between two sovereign countries, but we want to give up part of our sovereignty and incorporate it into the EU. So our decision is very clear.
But may I press you on the sanctions question a bit? If you were a member of the EU today, would you consent sanctions against Russia?
We would.
You would, okay.
We would.
Could you imagine a cooperation with Russia and the EU?
They can for sure, but they won't for sure. So, because the interests are different, and for if they would cooperate until now. I don't see what was changed to start that cooperation right now. And when we are talking about Western Balkan, you are forgetting the main political player in Balkan region. It's the United States. So this is also the question that cannot be solved without them. And I don't see actually it's possible, but a lot of things needs to be changed that it's happened on Western Balkan. To see cooperation between EU, Russia and United States when it comes to different interests.
Are you saying that the US is the most important player?
Right now, yes.
Can you elaborate on this a bit? And how far?
US has the strongest presence in Kosovo when it comes to military. Also, US was the strongest supporter of integration of Balkan region into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and also decision-making process in Washington is easier than in Brussels. So everything what needs to be decided in Western Balkan, it's easier response we are getting from Washington than from Brussels.
There's another good question from the audience which I'd like to pose to you, and this is
can I just comment on that one, because I think it's important.
Sure.
I think there are different relations, and when looking on the Western Balkan countries' relations with the EU, that is about them wanting to join the European Union, and that is slightly different from the relation they will have with other important third parties like the US, or for that sake with Russia. And on the question as such, I think when we are working with our Western Balkan partners, I don't think we have a reflection on our mind that we should start to work with third countries directly in some kind of cooperation on that particular issues. But we are working directly with them on a bilateral basis when it comes to them coming closer. Then, of course, there is a specific situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which goes back to the Dayton, and of course, Deputy Minister knows that much better than me, where there are also a role for United States and for Russia to play. And so I think we have to see it from that angle, that these are different kinds of relations that are ongoing, and the deep and the most, I would argue, the deepest and the richest relation that is happening right now is between the EU and the countries in the Western Balkan.
Right. One question that I'm getting online here with the request for a brief answer from you. Does the fact that the UK is leaving the EU improve the chances for a quick EU accession of your countries, given that the EU might want to prove that it is still attractive?
You want me to start?
Sorry?
On that one, I don't think it influences that the speed of the process will not be influenced by that fact. No. The speed of the process will only be influenced by the countries concerned and the way that they are able to take on the rather difficult conditions that follow in the end, the membership of the EU.
Right. I'll just say that there was no Brexit when there was inaugural speech of the President Juncker. And we have the summit yesterday of the all EU member states and the Western Balkans. So something changed. And I think that politically it was not positive for the Western Balkans, since we are integrating at the same time when there is a disintegration of huge, important member state. But it casted some last light on the region. In the political terms.
Thanks very much. I'm happy to take questions from the audience, even if you don't want to use the app. And I see a question from the gentleman down there. Getting a microphone to you. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Sabatil. I would like to know about the relation between the situation in the Visegrad and other new member countries regarding democracy, rule of law, and corruption on the enlargement process. many people in the old member states are critical of another enlargement just because of the situation there. I was recently in Belgrade, and people told me, we don't like to be treated like our Slavic brothers and sisters one day. So the enlargement fatigue, I think, is a very strong factor. I don't know how this is seen in the Visegrad countries. Do you think they set the best example for joining the EU when I think on Article 7 and other issues? I would be interested how you see this context. Thank you very much.
Who would like to start?
I really cannot answer to that question. I just want to give some light from my perspective. The public opinion in Montenegro is more than 70% for integration of Montenegro and into European Union. For sure, I would like to be treated as my Slavic brothers to be part of European Union, because I don't see any difference among the European Union when it comes to nations, religion, etc., etc. I don't know for Belgrade, but for sure we know what is our job. We already opened 30 chapters, we closed 3, and until the end of this year we hope we will open all the chapters and close some others. So we put in front of our government one very demanding task until 2020 in October, when will be next elections, to close all the chapters. So we are working hardly. I know that Montenegro is the smallest country with the limited resources, capabilities and everything, but we are keen to do that, and for sure we will make even much more difficult decisions just to fulfill the criteria, because for us there is no greater goal right now than to become a member of European Union, because we fulfilled our first foreign priority goal, membership in NATO. Right now with that goal we I think that solved our first problem. It's security and stability, that we defeated all the greater nationalistic projects in the Balkan Peninsula who saw Montenegro as an integral part of it. So now second, and the greater political goal right now is European integration, and even those who saw themselves like very Slavic, they are also interested to be part of European Union.
So Danielson, with the benefit of hindsight, looking back on the history of EU enlargement, Eastern enlargement, there has been some criticism as to the relatively early accession of Romania and Bulgaria. And one of the arguments was that the EU too early on gave up its leverage for transformation and reform. Do you believe that this criticism is justified? And if so, how would you want to avoid making the same mistakes with the Balkan states?
Yeah, so every enlargement, I think, is a bit is built on the experience of the last enlargement. I mean, I'm a Swede. I was part of the Swedish enlargement, and some of the experience of that one played into the big enlargement. The big enlargement has also there are issues coming out of that one, which now have played into the process as we are right now. And you're right that this process we have right now, and that's a bit reply to your question, is very much based on seeing to that it's not only the in terms of legislation that the European values should be reflected, and the European legislation should be reflected, and judiciary should be in place, and all the other elements that are important, but also in deeds, in actually on the ground, seeing to that it's put into place. And that replies part to Garrett's question, that is very much in the center of what we are doing right now. And as you pointed to, for Montenegro, for instance, they have been struggling with what is called Chapter 23 and 24 for the last 3 or 4 years. And there are still quite a lot of elements that needs to be addressed in order to exactly do that. And the reason is that it's no good for anybody to have new member states which are not fully up to being able to take on the values and the legislation. So that, yes, you're right. So there has been a lessons learned process, which means that the process today is more diligent, takes longer time, and is more demanding for the countries that are joining.
Talking about values, I wonder if you could comment on the question where in the realm of values you see the most important work to do. Is it social tolerance? Is it freedom of expression? Is it, well, we touched upon the issue of anti-corruption, of course, but what's the main challenge for you?
But what I stated earlier, and I think that the strategy that was seen outside of the strategy for the enlargement of the Commission saw the areas where which is across the chessboard of the Western Balkans are the deficiencies. Being professionally lawyer, I think that the rule of law is the value or the issue that needs to be more deeply enrooted in the region as such. Out of it, you can derive so many things, and tackling and dealing with the concept of the rule of law is something for me prerequisite for the social coherence, economic growth, investments, business security, physical security.
And for sure, what we are expecting to achieve much more values than what we are having right now is in the rule of law, fighting against corruption, organized crime, etc., etc. But I must say that we are keen to do that, and a very hard decision. It was never a problem within our government to make. In 2008, Montenegro recognized Kosovo as an independent country. Even 85% of our domestic population was against it. Then, let's say, when we started our accession to NATO, 70% of population was against it. So we knew what is our final goal, and we know also that the path on it is not so easy. So we decide, no matter how difficult decisions should be, we need to take them, and also to explain to the population why we are doing that. And so far was quite okay. And I just want to respond to Mr. Danielson when he says about what preconditions, struggling, etc., etc. 14 years ago, I was Deputy Foreign Minister of Serbia and Montenegro. At that time, I had the opportunity to see at the archives, actually, the former minister, who's now 92, of big Yugoslavia, socialist Yugoslavia, came to my office and asking me to see the archives because he wants to write the memoirs or something like that. And I saw a document from 1988 when European Economical Community sent a letter, invitation letter for Yugoslavia to join unconditionally, so without any precondition for Yugoslavia, just to join and to have all the benefits. I don't think that Yugoslavia was significantly better or at all better than any single today's country in the region of Western Balkans when it comes to rule of law, human rights, etc., etc. Corruption, of course, organized crime was not so present at that time, but this is also the situation when the time is also very important when you are coming to some point and to make decisions.
Talking about time, I have a tough one from the audience here again. If the Balkan countries, and this comes from an anonymous user, if Balkan countries are fighting hard against organized crime and corruption, why is it yet the biggest problem for decades?
I can answer that. Because this is the last point where the European Union can really focus on what we need to improve. The presence of corruption today and 20 years ago is completely on different level. Today is significantly lower. When it comes to organized crime, I don't think that organized crime is much more present in Montenegro than in any EU country today. Of course, in Montenegro is so visible because Montenegro is on the scope. everybody's looking, 20-something countries of European Union is looking on it, and you need to prove that on every day. Other countries who are already member of European Union, they are not on the scope. And that's why it's so present, because all other chapters we are doing well. Some of them are much more problematic due to the limited resources, like let's say ecology, then urban planning, financial constraints, fiscal stabilities, which are also very huge challenges in the Balkan countries. From my perspective, when it comes to Montenegro, for me, the biggest challenge for us is the ecological problem what we are having right now in our country, or let's say fiscal constraints than organized crime. Even, I don't want to say that we don't have it, because it's visible, we do have it.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about something else? Coming back to the value question, the freedom of press in your country. Freedom House rates Montenegro and Bosnia as only partly free in terms of freedom and press. Would you subscribe to this sentencing? And if so, why is press only half free in your countries?
I don't know what the Freedom House was taking as the criteria, but media in Bosnia and Herzegovina are private-owned ones, of course, in the market. There's no any type of the influence of the governments or the governance in the past decades on the editorial policy or whatsoever. Public broadcasting systems in Bosnia and Herzegovina are also out of the scope of the parliament by influencing the elections of the managerial bodies within the public broadcasting services. But as the colleague said, this is basically the question of transition and institution building. So it takes time to reach the top positions when it comes to the entirely media freedoms. Thanks to God, we don't have. There was some physical attacks on the journalists in the past year that we were really strongly condemning, and I'm also using this opportunity because we are opening the possibility for the journalists and the media to work freely in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Well, Freedom House concretely mentions political pressure against certain journalists, lawsuits that are being filed against certain media in Montenegro, which is especially mentioned. Is it a fair rating, Mr. Bošković?
You know, for sure we are looking it from different perspective. What is actual situation? There is no single government in Western Balkan who would say that freedom of media is one of the stepping stones for democracy and everything. For sure, there is a problems. Maybe difference from the country to the country or similar. Let's say that some tragical events which happened in Montenegro 15 or 20 days ago, or what's happened in Slovakia here, cannot, let's say, make that picture different, because the freedom of media is guaranteed here or there, no matter. But you know, I can say so many examples when I can tell you that the freedom of media in Montenegro is granted and delivered from the politics, let's say, or from the government. Last year we paid all the debts for all media in Montenegro, and the highest of those were of those media who are criticizing government the most.
Well, that's very grateful.
So that's the truth.
Right.
But of course, I'm not opposing that. I'm just telling you that when you are living there, it's completely a slightly different picture than what it looks from abroad, and especially if you are using just the sources for your information from those who are getting money from abroad, then it can be, the picture can be different.
Mr. Dennison, you wanted to step in?
Yeah, no, on this one, I think the starting point is that, as has been said by both my fellow speakers, there has been lots of progress over the last couple of years. So let's recognize that. That being said, there are fundamental or rather substantial challenges ahead when it comes to the issues relating to values, and we have partly discussed them. I think media is one, and there it has to do both with the legislative framework, which is fairly all right, but there is something about the quality of the media which goes much deeper, and that has to do with the financing, that has to do with the role of the journalists and the tradition of media in the society. I mean, having the role of putting the executive into being accountable. And this is something where it's clear that improvements are there. We have media conferences regularly where this issue comes out, and I think Freedom House is a good example of why that's why they land, I think, in this kind of conclusion, apart from what you mentioned. The third element, which I think is immensely important, is civil society. And that is important because in this fundamental transition that is the path towards the European perspective member of the EU, civil society will have to play a very, very important role, both in holding the executive in account, but also in bringing the public opinion with them in the process. And here, there is, I think, also an area where there is quite a lot of improvements that can be done in all the countries concerned.
Thank you. I want to bring questions in now from your side, but before I do so, may I ask you to vote again now on the question that we put to you at the start. So, do you believe, again, that by 2025, some Western Balkan states will have entered, or will have a fair perspective of entering the European Union? And we will have the results right at the end of the session. But I've seen three questions. First, the lady in the back, and then the lady in the green shirt, and the gentleman down there.
Hello, I'm Leila from the Foreign Policy Initiative from Bosnia. It's a think tank. We're a civil society place in Bosnia. What my question is has to do with what we discussed yesterday. Only partially tackled the essence of Mr. Lajčák's question and the dilemma whether we can start and initiate a renaissance of multilateralism. Maybe the place called Balkans, or the Western Balkans, where we have the name dispute, Ohrid Agreement, Dayton Agreement, and Brussels process and Brussels Agreement, can be a perfect place for this. This is where at least two sets of multilateralisms meet, and not entirely successfully, in my deep belief. Maybe something can be done about it. Thank you.
Who do you want to put the question to?
The entire panel, maybe Mr. Danielson.
Okay. Yes, the lady in the fourth row down here in the green shirt. Yep.
Another question for Mr. Danielson. Has Brussels thought in any way about a possible scenario happening again, whereas an old member state from the region blackmails an acceding state in order to obtain, advantages in terms of territory or otherwise? Thank you.
And the gentleman, please.
Yes, my name's Ian Anthony. I'm from CIPRI, which is a research institute in Stockholm. And I'm really addressing the question to the colleagues from the region. Sometimes in the past, the impression has been given that more value is placed on relationships with Brussels or with Berlin or with other capitals than the relations between the countries in the region itself. I'd just be really interested in your views on whether you think that's changed fundamentally and how the prospects are for cooperation within the region among the countries, both generally and also on some of the particularly sensitive issues which have caused problems even in the recent past.
Okay, on the first question, I think it's a very, very valuable idea that you are mentioning. Indeed, I tend to agree with you that the region, maybe not multilateralism globally, but it could be a good example of cooperation and overcoming legacies of the past. And you mentioned the name issue. I think you would have heard from yesterday that the two parties are involved in that discussion seems to have come closer towards finding an agreement, which is extremely welcome. And the dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade is ongoing. There has been an agreement between Kosovo and Montenegro on the border dispute, which is very welcome. And I think it addresses an issue which is fundamental for the, I would argue, positive development of the Western Balkans, which is to address the legacies of the past and reconciliation. Without doing that, it's going to be more difficult. And how to do that? Well, one element is, I think, what you mentioned, namely the whole issue of regional cooperation. And therefore, what is happening right now in terms of in this Berlin Plus process, as it's called, which is very much bringing the region together on concrete ideas of how they can work better in the area of connectivity, physical to begin with, but now moving over more and more towards the economic cooperation, where everybody knows that if you can get the trade between Serbia and, say, Albania to blossom, this will provide substantial economic benefits, or for that sake, from Bosnia-Herzegovina to Montenegro. You don't sell vegetables between these countries because the border controls takes too long. That's the reality. So these are the issues that needs to be addressed.
Dennis,
but in that context, one further point.
Brief questions, because
in that context,
just with flight.
Yeah, on that issue of regional cooperation, it's moving also over to people, which is an essential part. Youth cooperation in particular.
Yeah. Who wants to answer the other question? Blackmailing, for instance.
But it was delivered to him.
Okay, as you like.
Yeah.
Okay.
The lady in green.
The lady in green, yeah. That was on the. Sorry, give me the. I get so engaged here in regional cooperation. It was the issue of.
It was about old existing member countries blackmailing.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, you will see in the strategy that we are bringing up that issue for the future. That which one should be sure that in the future there should not be blockages by countries who are joining the EU. So that is something, and that is very much linked also to the whole issue of addressing the issue of outstanding border disputes and others, and of course good neighbour relations.
On the issue on the regional cooperation and the tight connections that we have, in the past years and in the past decade, let's say, the regional cooperation was conditio sine qua non for the cooperation and all the aspirations of the individual countries towards the Brussels. Yes, it might be interpreted in the way that we were all, looking directly to the Brussels, not seeing what the neighbors are doing. So, but for the past decade, that was changed, and the originally owned regional cooperation processes like Southeast European cooperation process is, I would say, an example from where derived the regional cooperation council with a seat in Sarajevo. So there is a harmonization of the, I would say, strategies and the policies which are going on, of course, in the region. But by far more important is the concrete deeds when it comes to the dealing between the countries. The shiniest, the brightest example, for example, in my mandate was that we took from the previous government opened dispute with the Montenegro. Exactly. Montenegro didn't have their ambassador in Sarajevo, we didn't have our ambassador in Podgorica, because there was a dispute on the ratification of the border agreement. It was done in 3 months' time because we saw that it was highly politicized, that it doesn't have anything to do with the facts, and we swept it away from the table in the question of 3 months. We are trying to do it with Serbia. We have signed agreement on the border with Croatia, and the border issues are the main issues why some of the countries are using their position in trying to slow down or stop. I would say the candidate countries. We are not still candidate country, but Border issues are main, but not only. Let's not forget what our friends in Macedonia are going through for the past decades on this subject.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry, but time is up already. But I don't want to let you leave without publishing the latest results of our poll. I think, we have it on the screen. So there is a slight shift of opinion, a very slight shift of opinion. To remind you, the first vote was 45 to 44%. 55 to 45, I'm very sorry. So,
and we were not talking about the tourism, beautiful countries
quite
that
right.
we didn't talk, and these are the results. So, and the great food and wine that we have there. So,
we should cover this in the next one. Absolutely. Thanks for the hint. Right. May I just, as we are advertising, may I just advertise the other events that are up here? The next one is at 3:30 in the Danube Space, Trump's transatlantic bond. In the Habsburg room, there's a panel, Remote-Controlled Terrorism, What's the Price of Freedom? And here in Marie-Therese, in 1 hour, Populism, is the tide over yet? Thank you very much for your attention. Have a good afternoon and night session. Bye-bye.